Hey everyone, it's your favorite host, Marcus Norman of Gentleman Style Podcast Show. Today we have a treat for you guys. We are going to dive deep into the minds of espionage and spies and the government and cybersecurity and cyber warfare. And I have the man, the myth, the legend himself to help us navigate these tricky waters. This man you won't want to miss. You won't want to stay 1 second of this episode because what he has to say is the absolute truth. This is what you need to tune into and what you need to hear because what he has is insight knowledge. Stay tuned, stay with us. Here we go. Hey everyone, I'm your favorite host, Marcus of Gentleman Style Podcast Show. And today I have Karim Hijazi. This man, his entire career has been one serendipitous adventure to another. From being born overseas in a tiny oil-rich country in Kuwait to moving to New York City to pursue a career as a professional fashion photographer. And really good, might I add. Really great work and really quality work. Would have never expected him to get into the world of today, which is, first off, starting as a bartender, then working to become a spy, and then a spy hunter, and now today, a cybersecurity expert and professional entrepreneur who has started several businesses and exited several businesses, all in 20 years of his extreme, unique, powerhouse lifestyle. Help me welcome to the stage the incredible Mr. Karim Hijazi. Welcome to the Gentleman Style Podcast. How are you, sir?
I'm doing really well, Marcus. Thanks for having me here.
It's a pleasure. True honor to have you, sir. Sir, I gotta ask a question. How? the number one question. How did you go from bartender, serial entrepreneur, spy? Can you tell us how did you get into that?
Great question, Marcus. One I get fair bit, as you can probably imagine. So I'll be as concise as I can because we got so much to talk about today as we talked about pre-show here. So I started with absolutely no intention to go into intelligence. Had no idea I would land there. As you said very accurately in the pre-roll here, I went to New York to be a photographer. Had every intention to go down that road. Realized very quickly in New York City that you can't just jump into the world of being a photographer and make money to live right off the bat. And that led me to get a bartending job. And I've told a lot of people, people are usually give me a little bit of that head tilt, like German Shepherd head tilt, like I don't get why you would possibly suggest that bartending was part of this career path. But I'll say there's no job like bartending that gets you to understand people better very rapidly, where you have a rapid fire approach with people that you need to contend with, positive and negative, and learn the nuances that come with that, which is a key part of an intelligence operative's role, to be honest with you. And I mean, it's funny to draw the parallels, but they're really there. So those were some interesting experiences in my youth, very young doing that. And then ultimately reached a point in my career with that, I should say, sort of a career that I needed to do something bigger. I felt like I was not exactly doing what was, wasn't seeing the full scope of my capabilities. And I moved back overseas to work at a company in a very somewhat boring job, to be honest with you. The company was a firm that represented U.S. oil companies in the Middle East. And they were essentially a paper pushing company. They essentially took contracts and pushed them from one side of the desk to the other to facilitate these deals. And I didn't have a very highfalutin job of any kind. I was just this little minion there. But what I soon realized was that they were challenged because they were trying to help their vendor win a deal. Simply that. And I started asking questions, the usual ones, which is, well, how do you win? And what's stopping us from winning? And how can we essentially, I was very curious, very obnoxious in my questioning, to where they finally said, look, I mean, we're just going to have to hope, and we're going to have to just hope that the company that we represent knows what they're doing. And I thought, there's got to be a better way to do this, and there's got to be some lever or toggle that we can pull. And I realized very quickly that we were a company that represented a big oil company organization in the US, while the competitor was another company somewhere, in this case it was in Japan, that had an agent represent them in the Middle East as well. So I thought, if I can find some way to get some information from that agent, I'm essentially finding a weak point in the system to solicit information that would give us an advantage. And without getting into gory details, Marcus, I found a way to get that information, delivered it to the management of this company, which allowed us to win this incredibly big deal. And it sort of blew their minds that I was able to get this information, despite all their efforts, despite all the efforts of a multi-million-dollar organization. And it was really one of the base and the fundamentals of what every hacking situation is today. You find a weak spot in the system and you exploit it, and you win by getting an access to the environment by something that was otherwise not seen. And that kicked off, ignited the flame for me, where I was enamored by that, and I took on 2 more clients after that. I think over the course of 3 to 4 months after that, I finally incorporated a company around it. I went to London and Dubai and other places like that. And this is the spy part, right? And then eventually moved it to the U.S. and continued the efforts in the early 2000s. It took me all the way around 2001. And that's when I made that leap to the next phase of my career, which was the counter spy, as you put it, hunting them down, hunting my peers effectively on behalf of my customers or clients that were guys like me. So who better to hire than someone that could do it with them to tell them how it might happen with their competitive, organizations or their landscape that was out to get them. So I'll pause for a minute, but that's essentially how I ended up in that role, as you said very accurately, very serendipitously.
So you were paid to spy and then hunt down your like you said your peers.
Yes.
How was that? Did you ever feel like your life was in danger?
There were definitely some hair-raising moments in my career during then where I was probably interfering, let's call it that, with deals in the multiple millions of dollars, where quite frankly, you are disrupting something that has a lot of inertia behind it financially for someone. So if you're someone that is endangering their profits, you're a problem. And so Marcus, definitely 100%. There were a couple scenarios where it was well beyond something that would have resulted in me being fired. It was more like I was going to be hunted by a group that wanted me out of the way for some of these things. I actually share some of those stories. You may have heard, where you started big oil and big pharma, and you're now dealing with the organizations that resemble more like cartels than they resemble corporations. And so you deal with something much more nefarious and scary. So I was glad to move into the realm of security soon thereafter, where I said, look, let me leave the stage where I'm the hunted, and let me start providing security and protections for organizations that may be spied upon and help them counter spy. That was a big part of my decision process to transition into the protection counter side of the business rather than the actual spying side of the business.
Wow. Mr. Karim Hijazi. Yeah. Mr. Karim, tell us. I gotta ask the question. How you started several companies and then exited several, sold them for whatever dollar amount. Tell us about your current company, Prevailion.
Yes.
What's the goal? What's the company's mission?
Yeah, great question, and I'll kind of tee it up with how you led into this. So yes, I've seen opportunity, and with every entrepreneur you probably speak with, it'll be a similar narrative. They see a problem, they identify a solution to that problem, and then they capitalize on that. They throw it out, they split, and they figure out a way that can address a large market that really makes something valuable. And up to around 2010, to kind of give you a nice transition from where we left off, where I was the counter spy consultant. That was just me. I was the product, Marcus. I was the actual consultant that was hired to deliver value in terms of advice and recommendations and systems. But it only to the degree I was able to address the problem. I only do so much as an individual or with a small group of consultants. So around 2010, I figured out a technology that originally I built to serve my consultancy directly, but then realized that that technology could be sold independently as a product. And so that was my debut into building companies that actually build a product that can be sold directly to the customer rather than buying the consulting that comes with the product, right? And that was an eye-opening experience for me because I'd never built a product before, certainly not anything to sell. I built tools for a team to never built a product to sell. It was hugely interesting, and I was wide-eyed, and this is around 2010. And unbelievably, from essentially napkin, conceiving the product to exit of the company, selling it was about a 2-year run, which is extremely fast for most companies. And the company that bought it was an extremely well-known cybersecurity company called Mandiant, which I've heard about in the news. That company, in turn, was acquired by a company called FireEye, and now, most recently, as of about 3 months ago, it was acquired by Google. Second largest acquisition Google's ever made in history. So no, not talking about small bucks here, pretty big. Prevailion is an evolution of that capability there. And I'll explain what we do. What I figured out, and it harkens back to your question about the spy world that I came from. One of the most key tenets of that world was you're only going to get so far by being defensive. You're only going to do so well building a castle and a moat around your crown jewels. What you need to be able to do is become formidable, swayed or unused to they were being it's the old way of looking at things, which is you become as dangerous as the adversary themselves, and they second guess themselves about attacking you. They'll go move on to easier low-hanging fruit, which is kind of the goal here. So what Prevailion does is we actually hack into the hackers' infrastructure that they set up. And in doing so, we get to see who they're victimizing. And then we're able to inform the victims that they've been attacked or they're in the process of being infiltrated by this adversary. So oddly enough, to your point, I've literally done the same thing with my and it made it much more so it's more of a it's really our intelligence around who's infecting you. And Prevailion in biological terms, just like we've dealt with biological social distancing, we essentially provide the necessary intelligence so companies can cyber socially distance themselves, if you will, from each other so they don't become infected by these threats. So the whole can I'm sure Mark, as you maybe.
So you alerted customers and your clients, hey, you are being attacked. Did you offer any tips to prevent attacks? Or did you attack back? Did you say, hey, did your employers ever say, hey, we want you to see what this company's doing, that company's doing, what this country's doing, anything like that? Anything like that?
I get those questions a lot. I get those requests. I definitely get additions to the contract which say, hey, while you're in there, do you mind disrupting? And unfortunately, I can only do so much legally as a private sector organization. Usually when I get those types of requests, I'll say, look, let me direct you over here to law enforcement or the intelligence community for further action. It's outside the domain of a private company to respond that way. Now, that being said, we certainly provide an immense amount of intelligence back to the government for actioning. We do provide an immense amount of intelligence to the victim organizations, or I would say organizations that have the proclivity to be infected by their peers. So we allow them to preemptively limit their exposure, which is a big deal. It's almost like, again, I use a biological metaphor a lot. It's as if you and I were working together, Marcus, and I said, look, Marcus, I know you have 3 really good friends you always go to lunch with on Fridays. You might want to hold off on this Friday's lunch because 2 of them are ill. And I don't want you to go and be subject to that infection, so just rain check it. That's equivalently what I provide companies today, the ability to preemptively and proactively limit their exposure to something that could be a problem. And then we help those partner companies remediate those problems. And then we essentially grow think of it like concentric circles, like a target. We keep getting those rings to be more and more green and clean around the center, which is our customer and our client. So it's an interesting strategy that is quite controversial because we're sharing an organization's compromise status with another organization, and everyone has an issue with that. It's like me sharing what would be equivalency of medical records with someone else about a patient, which ethically has its issues, but there's a positive to it. So we've fielded a lot of questions and commentary around that.
Wow. Karim Hijazi. We have one commercial break. Don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Good day, podcast listeners. This is your boy, Marcus Norman of Gentleman Style Podcast Show. I wanted to let you guys know that we will be rolling out a new feature and adding a join sponsor button next to the subscriber button here at the bottom of your screen. Once you click the button, it will display 3 membership levels. Gentleman Gentry, which is our entry level, Duke Duchess, which is our season level, and the Emperor and Empress, which is our most sophisticated level, which you will receive unique perks and benefits at each differing level and gain access to our community tab. We will also be sharing polls, upcoming events, and interviews, as well as receive feedback from our sponsors directly. Your support helps me find new and exciting guests to bring to the stage live. Well, in order to get the higher end speakers, it requires, you guessed it, money. So thank you for tuning in to my channel. And if becoming a sponsor sounds good to you, then select the join button below and choose your desired sponsor level. Let's continue to grow and serve the future of generations of men and women to come. Love you guys. Bye. We are back to the Gentleman Style Podcast Show. We have Mr. Karim Hijazi, the man, the myth, legend himself, here spilling some tea, and spill all the tea, right? For safety, right? Because this is what he do. On being a spy is 20 years of experience working for various organizations, government organizations, and how he made a career of it. If you missed it, go back, scroll back, and check him out. But tune in to what we're talking about today, because this man is incredible. Mr. Karim, we recently experienced some espionage with the Colonial Pipeline attack. What was that all about? Was that just some bad antivirus software, or what happened there?
Yeah, I wish it was that, Marcus. Unfortunately, it was even worse. Everyone questioned about how these hackers could have gotten into a well-defended organization like a pipeline organization, and it's a fair question. Unbelievably, the real story is that the access to that environment was due to the fact that some employee had their credentials stolen at some point in the past. No one really knows when that happened. And those credentials were brokered on what you've probably heard of, which is the dark or deep web. You hear that a lot. And this threat actor bought those credentials from someone or accrued them somehow and used them to get in. They literally rode what's called the VPN that the employee was given by the company to access the corporate environment from. It was meant to be a legitimate security product. That hacker used that legitimate security product to get in and then loiter around within the organization and eventually ransomware them. And ransomware, just for listeners, very, very quickly, is what it sounds like. It is literally encrypting or extorting or both the organization for money. And when I say encrypting, what they're doing is they're taking the data or they're taking systems and they're making them inoperable by encrypting them. And then they're asking for money in return for the key to unlock it all. Or they're asking for money to say, give me the money unless you want me to share all this, reputation harming data I have on you, or whatever the case may be, or both. And so that's what happened. And they put them in a hobbled state because they hit their billing systems to where the organization couldn't bill effectively or properly. There's no question that the threat actor could have probably laterally moved throughout the organization and done more damage. They just chose to pursue this particular section of the organization and keep the company on its knees. And unfortunately, Marcus, it's one of these problems where an antivirus or just a security product that's deployed is not sophisticated enough today compared to the sophistication of the threat actor to stop it, because the threat actor in this case looked like an employee doing something legitimate, which no security product in the world can stop. It's if you go to a CFO of a company and you say, hey, the security product might slow your business down, but it'll keep you secure, it never gets in the door. It'll get thrown out, because if it hobbles business, then it's counterproductive to profiteering, which is the whole goal of these businesses. So they'll take the risk to get a situation like this to happen in lieu of losing productivity, possibly with a security product that's overzealous. So I'll pause there, but hopefully that gives you some context.
That gives great context. That gives great insight because it means that it's almost like we're moving fast. We're moving at a that's like just not productive, right? If it slows down production, we don't want it.
Right.
Even unfortunately, at the risk of our clients.
That's exactly right. And this is the age-old problem with something like cybersecurity, which even today, you'd think by now everyone would be embracing this in a big way. It's prolific enough of a problem. The mainstream has embraced, this issue as a real thing. The government has. There's been headline upon headline. There's executive orders about this. The problem is that human nature, Marcus, and it's interesting because your podcast is about this kind of thing. It's not just a business concern. It's a human nature issue. Most people feel like this is too far from home. It's something that they simply can't assume will affect them in any way. They assume that this is the kind of thing that only would affect someone like me who's in the industry. I might be targeted personally, or my family may be targeted personally. Not so. Threat actors have found that cyber is the new bank robbery of this generation or this century. It's almost what they perceive to be a victimless crime, because no one gets shot, no one gets hurt viscerally, physically. But the ramifications of these attacks are far-reaching, and they economically damage the organizations and the whole ecosystems of these companies substantially, where there are job losses, there are huge amounts of intellectual property theft and everything else. So people just still haven't quite embraced this as a reality. It hasn't become enough of a business issue. It's still a little bit on the fringes. Boards of these big companies don't understand it enough to make a really good decision in many cases. So to your point, Marcus, you're right. It's almost a dichotomy. We're moving too fast in some cases, and then absolutely too slow in others.
Yeah. Even at the risk of our own customers.
Yeah.
Wow. This is huge. This is huge. I want to transition. Your podcast, the Introverted Iconoclast.
Iconoclast. Yep.
Iconoclast. Mm-hmm. Incredible podcast. You touched on something that has been brought up numerous times in the political arena. The universal basic income.
Yep.
I want to talk about that because some people, they're both on both sides of the fence. Some people think that's a great thing. I need it. I need that income. And then some people think it'll actually hurt the economy in the United States.
Right.
Can you talk about what it is and the pros and cons and what you feel that is behind it? Because it's more. It's more than just money. There's technology behind this.
Yes.
Can you share that?
Yes, happy to. So, and I'm not an economist, but I will tell you that because I look at the movement of money and the nature of it as it starts to shift in evolution toward being purely electronic, it lives in my domain now. I have to look at it as an asset. 10 years ago, the assets were documents that could be harvested off a server. 5 years ago, it was other types of intellectual property out of universities like quantum technology and AI. Now it's just flat out money. And so honestly, it's interesting watching the transition of what they call digital transformation. And to your point, money is absolutely the next thing on the docket to move into explicitly a digital format. As it relates to a UBI or universal basic income, by definition, this is not a new concept. It really is about effectively a baseline income that is granted to you as a citizen of a country by the government on a some basis, monthly, bi-monthly, I don't know, quarterly. It depends. I guess it really depends on the nature of the government. But fundamentally, you're just given this money to live. And
whether you have a job or not.
Whether you have a job or not. Exactly right. And the key thing here is that while that sounds wonderful to a lot of folks that aren't exactly excited about their job today or don't care to get a job, it does come with strings. And here is where it gets to be interesting. And to your point around how it ties to technology. The concept of cutting a check that comes in the mail as a universal basic income is probably not the format that this is going to be deployed. What they're probably going to do is they're going to marry it with what we've seen or heard a lot about, which are the central bank digital currency, which is essentially the government's incarnation or version of cryptocurrency, right? The difference is, even per the name, it's not going to be decentralized. It's not going to be something that's going to live on a blockchain that everyone can look at and see and touch and have an impact on, which is, and Marcus, you and I could go on for hours about what blockchain is in cryptocurrency, but for the purposes of this question, the difference here is that the government is going to build a system, and if they haven't built it already, at least, we don't know to what degree they've got it built or in beta form or deployed. But what's going to be fascinating is it's going to be a form of currency that will almost live like an electronic wallet on a device, whether it's your phone or something else, and it'll be issued in digital format to that device, whatever that device may be. The key thing here is that it's programmable money. So the money that you get and the money that I get on a monthly basis in the form of a universal basic income could be controlled on a granular level, where if I do something that isn't in the best interest of someone or some group or some government, that value of money that I have could be different than what Marcus has, because Marcus lives by the letter of the law and he does everything exactly right. So it's a form of control that can be, employed here. We've all heard about China and the whole concept of a social credit score. This fundamentally starts to lay the groundwork for something like that, because it's another method of surveillance. It's another method of control. It gives an unprecedented visibility into what you're doing as an individual, all aggregated up into what would be considered their version of a blockchain that they centrally control. So
I want to stop you because I want to break that down for those that don't know what's going on.
Yep.
China is essentially monitoring. They're watching its citizens and verifying that you are doing certain things to improve that social credit score. And that's what makes you a viable citizen. So if you're going to the gym, you're going to the grocery store, eating healthy, those things may add points to your social credit score. Vice versa, you're not going to work on time. You're not doing certain things that make you a good citizen. It's monitoring. They're watching you, and they're basing your social status and your social credit score off of good or bad habits deemed by them to say this person is worthy of whatever. So I wanted to break that down. I'm sorry.
No, that was fantastic, Marcus. And then there's a lot of folks that have asked, and I want to dovetail it into there's two other pieces of this. I didn't really get into it in my small, brief intro to it in my little mini podcast on this, but this will be a good forum to get some people some context. People are probably asking, well, what's the point? I mean, this sounds like almost a new welfare system, which in some ways it is. But here's where it gets really interesting. Technology has gotten sophisticated enough to the point where many, many jobs that are still basically held by humans can start being laid off to or pawned off to technology. You could go to a McDonald's or a fast food place and literally have no people there anymore if they so wished. You could literally have it be completely electronic. And you start thinking about that at scale. Imagine if every McDonald's around the planet decided to go fully automated, because they could literally do it with absolute perfection these days. It's a gigantic vending machine if you want to think about it. And it's possible. And that would cause an immediate outpouring of individuals with, let's call it, minimal skill sets that may not be able to go and supplant their skills somewhere else. So they essentially have to stay home. So there is a reason for why they're going to say you need this, because there's going to be people over time that will start to be let go due to the fact that an automated vending machine is not going to ask for time off. It's not going to need a bathroom break. It's not going to need a paycheck. It's going to work 24/7 without complaint. There's government or big corporate see value in the profiteering nature of that. So there's a reason why this is coming. It's not just simply because they want to start having people go home and do what's right by us. I wish it was altruistic. It's probably not. Then there's another part of this that's concerning. And again, this is a rabbit hole, Marcus, but we touched on it before, so I do want to bring it up. The minute they centralize electronic currency, which counters the very value of crypto as we know it today, like Bitcoin and Ethereum and the rest of these, the fact that it's decentralized is the very nature of why it's secure. Because it's everywhere and nowhere at the same time is what makes it hard to hack. I shouldn't say unhackable because everything's hackable, but it makes it a lot harder to hack because there's no central point that you can train your crosshairs onto to attack, which is what hackers look for. The minute the central bank creates a proverbial electronic or cyber Fort Knox, that becomes target number one for adversaries. And they will hammer at that thing until they get in, whether it's at the walls of that environment or whether it's through a partner organization that has weaker operational security. Per why I built the company I did, because I needed to see what the periphery of an organization might look like before we assume it's safe. So there's a lot of pieces here that I think that I'm hoping, let's put it this way, the powers that be are soliciting the advice from various talents around to suggest ways to make this thing palatable and not just this utter mess that it might very well turn into.
So true. So true. So true. So true. I wanted to ask baseline.
Mhm.
Cryptocurrency at its core is a great thing. Where do you stand? Do you think it's still a viable product? Should we be investing our money? Or should it be something that's, because it's here to stay.
Mhm.
It's not a rumor anymore. It's not just a 599 thing. It's supplanted itself that this is here to stay. What are your thoughts on cryptocurrency and the future of cryptocurrency?
That's a really good question, Mark. I think that fundamentally you're 100% right. I think it's here to stay. The challenge that's always been with it is the marketplace survivability of it. Because right now, as you've heard probably, Bitcoin has been considered a store of wealth rather than a transactional cryptocurrency, right? That's a difference. That's a big difference. Many people tend to forget that you can't necessarily go to the grocery store today, not many places at least, and use a Bitcoin to pay for your groceries. And frankly, this is where government has some incredibly scary leverage. If they so wished to impress upon businesses and retailers to say, you must only use CBDC and not use any other cryptocurrency. And if you do, you're sort of embargoed, or dare I say, sanctioned. Heavy trigger word there. What are small businesses going to do? They're going to comply because they got to survive. And so, unfortunately, the way the government could conceivably hurt the existing cryptocurrency world is by making it an untenable form of currency. You could still maintain it as a store of wealth, but I don't know that it could survive an onslaught by regulators to say it's illegal to use in a transactional fashion. And that's where the war is right now. Because sure, you can have subcultures they have for years. I mean, this is why it came from this sort of ugly stigma around illicit trade with it from the early days, Bitcoin was known to be an illicit trade for drugs or contraband online. And then it finally found its way into the light a little bit and people started to embrace it. But there's still not a broad enough embracing of any one given cryptocurrency yet. What I do believe will stay, Marcus, is the smart contracts capability of the blockchain, like Ethereum. I think that will likely see its way into other things like deeds for houses, deeds for cars, and those are directly related to the whole NFT play. The non-fungible nature of a deed for a house is a really powerful thing, because now your deed for your house can't be stolen out from underneath you as easily, because there's a broad-based blockchain associated with that to suggest that you indeed own your house, you indeed own your car or a thing. And so I think there's value. So back to the underlying nature of crypto, the blockchain is here to stay. I'm just not sure how well all these variants or these alt currencies will fare in the long term. So far be it for me to say invest or not invest. It's a great question. I don't know.
Right. I will say my stance is I didn't understand the transition.
Mm-hmm.
When we because the dollar, if cryptocurrency was built to replace the dollar,
Mm-hmm.
you don't go to the stock market and buy a dollar. Right? Like you said, the investment opportunity is in the blockchain. To me, cryptocurrency is the essential digital dollar.
Mm-hmm.
I won't go and buy a dollar, but I'll go buy. But I will buy an item or product or service with that dollar. So when I from what I understand, the reason why cryptocurrency is so valuable is because there's a finite number of cryptocurrency available. So that's what causes the price to be so high.
Mm-hmm.
Because unlike the US dollar, which can be printed and made more of, or limited and restricted, you right now we can't create more cryptocurrency.
Absolutely right. You bring up a really good point. When in the 70s, when the gold standard was decoupled from the value of the dollar, that was the key change that made this tenable, because crypto, if you look at it on a fundamental level, is actually more of a valuable concept than a US dollar fundamentally, because there is a mathematical algorithm that, like you said, makes it a finite thing. While the US dollar is based on the full faith and blah, blah, blah of the US government. Okay, what's that? That's some ephemeral thing you're telling me. It's not based on the actual amount of gold at Fort Knox, which it used to be. So you're right. Now, the problem is it's getting people into the mindset to understand that an algorithm can indeed control the amount of something. It's a hard thing for a lot of folks to understand. It's such an ephemeral, ethereal concept for many people. They're like, but how is it possible? Isn't it just a computer making this digit thing? And it's like, if you understand the nature of how cryptography works, there is a finite nature to it that is immutable. It's a very powerful thing, but you have to believe it. So it's back to something very interesting, which is faith. And that's a really bizarre concept when you start talking finance and all that, but it's inextricably tied to our fiat or crypto. Both. They're very, very based in faith. Very much so.
Absolutely. I love this. What are some nuggets that you would offer to basic average American? What are some things we can do today to protect ourselves from being attacked, or being getting ransomware?
Yeah.
What can we do today?
No, it's a really good question. And there's a lot of consultants and guidelines and guidebooks and YouTube videos on all the things that you can do, in your home environment. And I think, I could certainly share a few concepts there, but I'll be honest, there's a broader, more fundamental thing that's really, really important. And it's for everyone that either has a family, doesn't have a family, has kids, doesn't have kids. I happen to have kids and a family and everything. It's surface is broader. You have to look at your world from an attack surface perspective. And what I mean by that is literally think of those words, attack surface. How much of your world can be susceptible to an attack. The modem that you have at your house tied to the router, or be the same thing, is one of the conduits by which someone can get in and attack you. The Xbox or PlayStation that your child has or you have, your home computers, your Nest thermostat, your Tesla, your smart TVs, your refrigerator with a IP address that tells you if your milk's sour. Those are all things that can be exploited by an adversary if you give them access to it. Do everything to limit that access, which means do not, and this is the number one thing, do not leave the default settings on the devices that you buy on. At least change the defaults to your own custom passwords and usernames. Do not leave admin password as your default thing, because it's easy, which I get it. But that is the number one thing that gets exploited, is just the defaults that come with these devices that you buy. That would be the first thing I would tell anyone. That's easy. It's just go in there, read the manual again, and see how to change those defaults. The second thing, and this has more to do with people that live on social media, Marcus, and people that absolutely broadcast their lives everywhere. They share every little bit of data about where they are at any given point, how they're doing at any given point, happy, sad, drunk. Don't do that. Do your best to try to limit that level of exposure to the world, because yes, you may be sharing that with your friends that find it humorous, but then guess who's watching? Everyone else is watching, and everyone else that wants to exploit something. The other thing I would mention also here is your children that find this to be the ultimate aphrodisiac for their age, which is the internet and social media and YouTube. All that exposure needs to be managed as a parent. I don't mean limiting them entirely, because then you're going to alienate them and they'll find a way to get to it anyway. But it's proctoring and managing it and educating them on how to be really, really cognizant of what they're getting into. My daughter, who's 10, might as well be a super spy herself. She knows exactly what to look for when she's playing her online games. She's reported plenty of people that probably were stalkers and people that were trying to get in there and talk to children her age, and she's tuned into it rather than trying to hold her back from it all, which is impossible. I've taught her to know what to look for to then be a good steward of it. She's probably other from being hurt because she's reported them. And that's the best thing you can do. Make everyone for a lot of effort to make sure that the kids are educated rather than, because it's really hard to do, because if you don't get it at home and they're going to school, there's a smartphone there that they're going to get to. They're going to play with it whether you know it or not. So you get them.
Love it. Love it. Love it. This has been exciting episode. I'm truly honored to have you on the show, Mr. Karim. This has been phenomenal, huge, and I want to say thank you for taking time out of your busy to be here and give this insight. Sir, I want to say this. Don't ever quit. Don't ever give up. We need what you're doing. That's a sad.
I appreciate that very much, Marcus. I will never quit, man. It's deeply, deeply ingrained in me, and there's many, many more adventures ahead. And I think we're only seeing the beginning of some of this, so it's going to be a ride. But I think, if we're all keep our heads on straight and stay true to some good foundational core principles that I think you talk about a ton on this podcast, I think we're going to be all right.
Yes, sir. How can my audience? How can we learn more?
Sure. So, as you said very accurately, I do have a podcast. It's called The Introverted Iconoclast. You can find it on everywhere. You can even get to the website with theintrovertediconoclast.com. I'm on Twitter as Karim Hijazi. I am also on Instagram as Introverted Icon. I'm just getting onto Instagram more and more lately. I was a late adopter there. I think, frankly, my goal is to keep getting feedback from folks about what they'd like to hear about. I'm really keen to get as much detail on where people's heads are and how some of my stories could be contributing to their lifestyle. That's the whole goal here. So, those are the best places to find me.
Absolutely. The introverted iconoclast. Introverted, iconic,
Gonna
get right. The introverted, ICONOCLAST.com for my audio listeners. You guys check him out. Absolutely informational. Like I said, you learn so much. I've learned so much just from tuning in myself. I have to let him go. He has a world to hack. No, I'm kidding. He has more to share, more to give, and more to learn and give back to our society. So like I always, and every show, take care of your friends, take care of your family, and always take care of business. This is Marcus Norman of Gentleman Style Podcast and Karim Hijazi. Spill in the tea. Love you guys. Bye.